So I've just watched a video which is ridiculous, really. It's from Yes Scotland. It's posted by them themselves, and I'll put a link to it here. But they are gloating about the fact that they shouted down a democratically elected politician in Dundee. That's Jim Murphy. He's a Glasgow MP, and he's got quite a lot of attention in this referendum campaign for going all over Scotland and campaigning in support of the Better Together campaign. He believes in the United Kingdom, and he believes it's a patriotic duty of Scots to vote no. And he is making a clear differentiation between patriotism and nationalism. Now, I have to say, I've got a lot of respect for what Jim Murphy is doing. Basically, in this video, I want to break it into two parts, because a lot of it is dominated by shouts of war criminal, and in terms of his relations to the Tony Blair administration and intervention in Iraq. I want to talk a bit about that, but I also want to talk about the nature of extreme elements of the Yes campaign, because I've been seeing this a lot. So basically, in the video, Jim Murphy is addressing the public, and a large mob of Yes people are shouting him down. Like, really shouting him down. And I believe, I don't know if it was in this situation, but I believe he got attacked by an egg. Now, egging politicians is hardly anything new. I don't know if that happened in Dundee or somewhere else. But anyway, firstly, about the war criminal thing. Now, it's true that Jim Murphy is probably a Blairite. So I'm just aligning that, because there's something wrong with my mouse tonight, so I'm just aligning that from a different angle. I'm using another mouse. Yeah. The Iraq thing was deeply divisive. At the time, I opposed the war, and I still have big misgivings about the way it was conducted. So I entirely understand the controversy around that, because it was a very bloody war in which many innocent people died. But in the 11 years since that, I have also reflected a lot, and I believe I was a bit jaundiced by the time. I believe my reflections on it were a bit obscure, because I was young, and I frankly was into radical politics. I certainly wasn't a communist, but I would say at the time I had fairly hard left views, and I do believe I was blinded to all reason. So in the time since then, I've been a bit more objective on this issue. I still think it probably was one intervention too far, and there are the very legitimate questions about the motivations for it, particularly as elusive WMDs were never found. However, I have nothing whatsoever to do with the likes of the Stop the War coalition, because the more I look at them, the more I think they are hypocrites. Their point basically is a supposedly pacifist stance, and they would say that Tony Blair and the ministers in his government, including Jim Murphy, have their hands covered in blood because they waged a war that thousands of innocent people died. Although it seems to escape their notice that many of those killings were not at the hands of coalition troops. It's something they constantly ignore. And in my opinion, the fact that they refuse to condemn sectarian suicide bombings in Iraq just shows their true colours. If they were really interested in peace, they would be condemning those sectarian groups that are trying to plunge Iraq into hell. And I've yet to see the Stop the War coalition condemn the Islamic State, which is causing a nightmare across Iraq. Of course, they would blame George Bush and Tony Blair for everything. So, in their opinion, there's no other actors in this. Saddam Hussein is not relevant. Sectarian thugs who want to drive Iraq into the abyss are not relevant. And none of them have blood on their hands. Now, let's just reflect on Saddam for a second. I know he's been dead for 8 years, but I think it is relevant, because when people look at intervention in Iraq, they seem to forget just how awful Saddam was. This is a man who committed genocide against the Kurdish people in the Al-Anfal campaign in 1988. This is a man who arguably started the Iran-Iraq war, who had countless Iranian and Iraqi deaths on his hands. I mean, the nature of a dictatorship, I doubt the Iraqi troops had a great deal of choice whether they fought or not. This is a man who invaded the sovereign state of Kuwait. This is a man who ruthlessly crushed all dissent in Iraq. All of those things seem to be overlooked. Now, the likes of the Stop the War coalition blame the UN for child mortality in Iraq when sanctions were put on it, instead of directing the blame where it should be, which is on Saddam. It's true that WMDs were never found, and it's true that the post-war planning was woeful. As we know, in the period from, let's say, 2006 to 2008 especially, Iraq plunged into a terrible, terrible sectarian conflict, which hasn't been resolved. Hopefully the stepping down of Nouri al-Maliki will change things. Today there's obviously a very grave situation with ISIS, but when the far left attack people like Jim Murphy and call them war criminals, I really do wonder why they're not consistent, and why they don't as forcefully condemn Saddam's record and condemn the thugs who are terrorising Iraq. It's all very well saying that Jim Murphy and other ministers in the Blair government have blood on their hands, but if they are really pacifists, which they claim to be, then they would be consistent. So that's why I think they're completely, they have no credibility, because if they were really pacifists, they would, okay, they'd be condemning Bush and Blair, but they would also be condemning the sectarian terrorist thugs who are driving Iraq into the abyss. I have yet to see the Stop the War coalition condemn the Islamic State, and that just shows their true colours. Maybe they have, but they're certainly not doing it as vocally as they condemn Western politicians. Now, like I say, I understand why Iraq is such a divisive issue, especially given that a lot of British servicemen, including a lot of Scots servicemen, died in that conflict. So it is legitimate for something as profound as war to be divisive and to raise emotions. But I wonder, was that protest in Dundee really about Iraq, or was it more to do with the union issue? They were labelling Jim Murphy not a real socialist, a Tory, to fuck off back to England and this sort of stuff. Basically they were shouting the man down. Now, I understand that this is a pivotal issue for Scotland. I understand, actually it's a pivotal issue for the whole of the UK, but if yes people think they're the only ones who are capable of having strong emotions on this, they should think again. You know, there's people like me who can't vote on this, but in my opinion it will affect the whole country. In fact, I think it's very dubious as to why we can't vote, because actually this would be like, I honestly equate this to Texas seceding from the United States, and if you think that's a phony equation, Texas was a country at one point. Scotland is a country, but it is a country that is part of a bigger country, which is the UK. So this will impact the whole UK. So anyone in the United Kingdom who has any notion of patriotism should be concerned about this issue. I don't think you have to be Scottish to be concerned about this. Now, Jim Murphy has had to put up with a lot, because he's went out there, he's shown what tough skin he has. In my opinion, he's a good MP, he's a good politician, because he goes out there and faces the heat. You know, it would be very, they say he's only in it for himself. They say he's a career politician. If Jim Murphy wanted to take a comfortable route, then he wouldn't be going out there and taking this abuse. He knows every day that he goes out in campaigns, there's a strong chance he'll be met by yes people, and there's a strong chance he'll have to put up with this sort of abuse. And basically you have a situation with one man trying to make a case against a mob. Now, I fully support their right to protest. I fully support their right to question him. And I fully support their right to have passionate opinions. And I understand the stakes here. I wouldn't expect this to be a polite little conversation with a cup of tea around the table. Emotions are running high on both sides. But only now has Yes Scotland come out and condemned this behaviour. It's taken them this long to condemn it. They've condemned it and their latest update. I'm pleased they have. But, you know, there's been this sort of behaviour has been going on throughout this campaign. Not just against well-known people like Jim Murphy, but against ordinary no voters. I've had Scottish friends who have been branded traitors because they're planning to vote no. Now, to be fair, it probably has worked the other way. I suspect that some no people have had their emotions get the better of them, and that's, I mean, there's been times, I would say, in the no campaign where it's been immature. For example, comparing Alex Salmond to Kim Jong-il was stupid. I'm a no person, but I think that was just stupid and it didn't help our case. So this takes a certain degree of responsibility. Yes, emotions are running high, but frankly we are too close now to the date for this sort of vitriolic, thuggish behaviour to take hold, because that will only indicate what a future Scotland will look like. And to me, yes, it's good that the Yes campaign have condemned this behaviour, but it's very dominant within the Yes side. I've seen Yes people say, oh, but it's not all of us. Well, that's true. Okay, I'm objective enough to see that not every Yes voter behaves like that, but there is a very large contingent of Yes voters who do. And if this is going to be the future Scotland, agree with us or it will shut you down. Will hound you out as they done with Nigel Farage. I mean, you can have strong opinions about the Iraq War, you can have strong opinions about the Union, but to shout a man down, not even let him make his point, you know, they can have angry debates with him, but all that was name calling. It was childish. You know, they could have made their case and said, Jim Murphy, why did you do this? Why did you do that? All it was name calling, which just shows how immature these people are. But I've seen this a lot from the far left, and I'm getting a little bit sick of it. As a centrist, they seem to have a problem with democracy. In the end of the day, this man was democratically elected. You can call him all the names under the sun, you can say he's not a real socialist, etc. There was one man saying, oh, the Labour Party left me. I think there's a legitimate debate to be had. I'm not a Labour person, but I know there's strong feelings within the Labour Party about New Labour. Okay. But in the end of the day, Jim Murphy is a democratically elected politician. So they might think they're insulting him, but they're actually insulting the people who voted for him. And the hard left does seem to have a problem with democracy. To me, democracy should not be about shouting people down and hounding people out, which is what these hard left thugs seem to think it's all about. Yes, emotions run high. You know, you wouldn't be human if you didn't have strong emotions about issues that impact people. You know, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I get very angry sometimes. Sure, I'd like to yell at certain politicians, but in a democratic society, that just looks ugly, and it does not attract people to your cause. There's certain Tory politicians I want to yell at because of workfare. But unfortunately, in a democratic society, well, I'm saying unfortunately, but this is the way it is. If you yell in someone's face, if you hound them down, if you're a group of people shouting someone down, that just looks like mob rule. I mean, I disagree with George Galloway in many areas, but he was right to say that when that mob confronted Nigel Farage in Edinburgh, they probably thought, oh, we're going to show what a racist Nigel Farage is. But all it done was made them look like archetypal far-left commie thugs, quite frankly. And to me, that sort of behaviour really is no better than skinheads terrorising minorities. It is basically the same sort of politics. You know, they talk about hope not hate, but what are they doing? They're shouting down anyone who disagrees with them. And whilst I get strong views myself, I try hard not to let that dictate my thinking in terms of how I interact with people. Yes, I lose my temper sometimes, especially online, but in a real world scenario, this cannot be the way, and I'm so fed up with it. Now they might say, oh, it was just a bit of shouting, it was harmless, but that does indicate what an independent Scotland is going to look like. In other words, what I would like to know, honestly, if Scotland gets independence, what is going to happen to those people who have voted no? Are they going to be marginalised? Are they going to be portrayed as traitors? I have a lot of questions. Here's a question. Scots who are currently abroad, for example, if they're working abroad temporarily, they currently have a British passport. Now, what are they going to do when they come back? Say, for example, they have a contract of several years. I don't know, they could be overseas contractors, they could be overseas teachers. They come back. What's going to happen? Is they will have a British passport. Can they apply for a Scottish passport overseas? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked. Another very big question I have is, what is this country actually going to be called? If Scotland gets independence, we'll have England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Is that going to be the United Kingdom? I genuinely don't know. So what I'm saying here is, the sort of intolerant, thuggish behaviour that I have seen, call me biased if you will, but I have seen it much more from the yes side than the no side. I have honestly not seen any no people call their opposition traitors. I have seen them use, let's say, colourful language, idiots and so on, and rabid nationalists, and okay, the name calling has went both ways, but I haven't seen any no people call yes people traitors. And let's say, for the sake of argument, there was a big terrorist attack tomorrow in a British city. I would have very strong feelings about the yes campaigners, because I would see them as trying to weaken the United Kingdom. In fact, that's what I see this as all about. But I'm trying to rise above calling individual yes voters traitors, because I don't like the word. I don't like that sort of politics. But as the date comes closer, I am concerned, because you have a resurgent Russia under Vladimir Putin. You have a very uncertain situation in the Middle East. This is not the time to be compromising Britain's role in the world. And yes, I say Britain's. Scotland, yes, but Britain. I'm looking at the bigger picture. Is this really the time to be compromising our role in the world? I really don't think it is. But there's nothing I can do about it. I can't vote. So all I can do is make these videos and share my thoughts. Yes, people of course are going to say I'm an idiot, you know, fuck off back to England and all this sort of stuff, because it's the only language many of them can seem to bring about. I'm not talking about everyone. I should emphasise that I know not all yes people are extremists, but there is a very strong undercurrent of this xenophobia within the yes side, and it usually comes down to portraying their opposition as English. Jim Murphy is a Glaswegian through and through. So to tell him to fuck off back to England is just, it's vile, basically. So I just think it's unfortunate that the yes side is so dominated by this sort of behaviour. I know it's not everybody, and it is good that the yes people have condemned this behaviour. And for our side, I would appeal to fellow no supporters in Scotland. Don't reduce yourself to their level. Don't use those sort of tactics. Try to treat them with respect, as infuriating as some of their attitudes are. It is important that if Scotland stays in the Union, likewise, I don't want yes people to feel marginalised. In the end of the day, they are fellow Scots, they are fellow Britons. So I don't want them to feel marginalised, although I think they're very wrong in their thinking. I don't want them to feel marginalised. I want to appeal to them. So it's critical. I just think it's disgusting what Jim Murphy has had to put up with, and I really think this isn't about Iraq. I think it's more to do with the Union, and they're using Iraq as an excuse. Maybe they do have strong views about Iraq, but like I say, in that case they should be consistent. Why are they not condemning ISIS? I mean, that really makes me angry, that they cannot rationalise that there is a movement out there that beheads defenceless journalists, sexually enslaves women, blows up civilians, forces men to convert to another religion, and they cannot bring themselves, murders unarmed soldiers, and yet they cannot bring themselves to condemn that. They're condemning Western politicians for a very difficult decision that they had to make, And yes, it's a controversial decision. I understand the controversy there, and I'm not saying I can't criticise it. If they really do believe that Jim Murphy is a war criminal, that's their view, but at least be consistent. That's what infuriates me about far-left pacifists. They're actually not pacifists, they're hypocrites. Because if they were really pacifists, if they were really all about being against warmongering and against the murder of innocent civilians, they would just as vocally be condemning ISIS. And they're not doing that. And I think that is shameful and pathetic. So it's this inconsistency. I mean, I try to be consistent. If there's situations where Western troops kill unarmed civilians, I unreservedly condemn them. It is a matter of consistency. And I think the carpet bombing of Baghdad was an utter disgrace. I think if there's an area above all to condemn in the Iraq thing, it would be that. But you know, I don't think these people see the bigger picture. They ignore what a complete sadistic dictator Saddam was. They don't suggest any alternatives as to what would have happened to him, and they don't condemn ISIS. So to me, they're utter hypocrites. I'll leave it there. Long live the United Kingdom.